Good morning. So yesterday, last 2 days, we learned the Gemara, which discusses the laws surrounding the mitzvah of Heseba, the mitzvah to recline during the Seder night. And we broke it down to a few sections in the Gemara. Section 1 is, when do you have to recline? During the eating of matzah and during the 4 cups of wine. What constitutes reclining? Leaning to the left, not to the right, not to the back. Who has to recline? The divans. Who has to recline is, we got into the details, who has to recline, and the question of whether you're in the presence of a parent, where you do have to recline, wife in front of her husband, teacher, a student in front of teacher, and so on. Right? Those are the sections. Did we miss anything? What?
No, I'm just looking. It looks like this would be everybody would be leaning to the left and be able to face each other.
Yeah. Having done that, we're now going to look at the section of the Shulchan Aruch that discusses those laws. The chapter we're looking at is Siman Taf Ayin Beis, chapter 472, which describes Dinei Heseba, the laws of reclining, the Dalot Kosis, and the laws of the 4 cups of wine. The 4 cups of wine is going to be discussed next in the Gemara, and when we learn that, we'll come back to this chapter to learn those laws. But first, the laws of reclining. Now, presumably, these two laws are put together as the Gemara puts them together,
right,
considering that they're both rabbinic enactments that are there to demonstrate our freedom. We're drinking 4 cups of wine in commemoration of our freedom, of our liberation. We're celebrating. We're free. We're drinking 4 cups of wine. And we're leaning because we're reclining because we're free people. So presumably that's how the Gemara puts them together, and that's how the Shulchan Aruch puts them together. Now we're going to see from the Alter Rebbe structure, it's rather interesting. It does follow the pattern of the Shulchan Aruch, the original from Rabbi Yosef Cairo, which I just looked at, but in some ways it deviates. So just to give you the pattern of how the Shulchan Aruch and Rabbi Yosef Cairo lays it out, and you'll see how the Alter Rebbe is a bit different. And I don't necessarily have a clarity on why that is. I'm just pointing it out. But it kind of stands out when you look at the face of it.
Well, doesn't the Alter Rebbe include other sources?
Well, certainly, but you'll see.
Like
Yes,
the Ashkenazic customs and so on.
certainly, many of the customs and many of the ideas that have emerged since the Shulchan Aruch are included in the Alter Rebbe, as well as other differences of opinion, whereas the Shulchan Aruch just has conclusions. There are more will bring a distinction of opinion, but for the most part, it's just conclusions. But all the commentary that's since then, it's the Shach, the Taz, the others will be included in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, certainly. I'm talking about the structure and the layout. So the way the Shulchan Aruch says it is like this, right? We're finally coming to the Seder night, because the chapter before, 471, which we just finished learning, was about the prohibition to eat in preparation for the Seder. So this is the first chapter, which now begins the actual Seder night. And therefore begins with, make sure your table is set during the daytime, so you can have your meal right away. Make sure your table is set beautifully. This is how the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Cairo lays it out. And then it says, when you set your table, set in such a way that you have a place to lean, a place to recline. And then it gets into the laws of reclining, of how you recline, who should recline, and so on. That's the order of how the Shulchan Aruch lays it out. You finished preparing for the day. You've been refraining from eating to build up an appetite. Make sure your table. Now, the last preparation is make sure your table set before daytime, so that you can start your Seder right away, right? Which actually we didn't discuss in the Gemara yet. It's going to come in the Gemara soon. We want to start our Seder right away so that the children don't fall asleep and they can be engaged. So you want to start as soon as possible, but you can't start early because you have to wait till nightfall, right? So make sure your table set before. That way you can start as soon as possible. And when you set your table, make sure you set it with a place to lean, to recline. And then it gets into the laws of reclining. That's what the Shulchan Aruch has said. Now let's see the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, a little background. I don't necessarily have an answer for why the Alter Rebbe changed the structure, but I'm just pointing it out. So let's see.
The Seder on the Seder.
The Seder of the Seder, that's right. Absolutely. Seder in Torah is also Torah. The order in Torah is also. Okay. So Siman Taf Ayin Beis, I'm reading the Hebrew, but of course you can follow along in English. Siman Taf Ayin Beis, chapter 472, Dinei Heseba, the laws regarding reclining, the Dalot Kosis, and the 4 cups of wine. Uboy, and we include, and there is in this chapter Lamed Aleph Sifim, 31 subsections. Aleph, section 1, first paragraph. His table should be set before the day, while it's still day, before the nightfall. So that he can do his seder as soon as it's nightfall. Yeah. Look at footnote 2. Mentioned this a number of times, that the Rebbe made it his mission to consolidate Chabad practice that has evolved over the years. And though that practice is compiled in the Rebbe's Haggadah, as well as in a book called the Book of Minhagim of Chabad. Chabad
uniform.
Sorry?
Make it uniform.
Yeah, the customs that have emerged ever since the Alter Rebbe founded Chabad and the various different practices from the Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe collected those and put it into a book called the Book of Minhagim. Yeah, standardized. Part of the process of Torah evolution, which God willing we'll begin to learn about on Monday nights. I hope you'll join us, right? Monday night, we're learning about the evolution of halacha, and all this will become so much clearer. So,
What time is that, Rabbi?
at 8 o'clock, God willing, on Monday nights. So,
Commercial break there.
Sorry?
That's a commercial.
A little commercial break, it's right. Shameless plug. So, Sefer Minhagim Chabad, page 38 states, this is the footnote 2, that the custom of the Rebbeim, the Chabad Rebbes, would be to begin the Seder immediately after the evening service on the first night of Pesach. I should add, because it's mentioned in the previous footnote, I think it's in footnote 1, that although we start the Seder right away and we set the table before, the kaira, the setting of the actual Seder plate, is done at nightfall, almost as if it's part of the Seder. In fact, the Rebbe would read the instructions as he would do it. Like the Haggadah has instructions that the Alter Rebbe compiled as part of his Siddur that he compiled. They would read those instructions. They would read Yisader al Shulchan Kaira Munach Begimel Matzahs. A person should organize on his plate, on his table, a plate with 3 matzahs, and then they would fulfill what he was saying you to do. Throughout the entire Seder, he'd read the instructions. And when it came to a point where you can't talk, like for example, when you wash your hands at Rachta, you cannot wash until after Kairach. Right? You wash your hands for the eating of the matzah, and then you make the bracha to eat the matzah, and then you have the kairach, right? So the Rebbe would read all the instructions of rachza, following all the way through till the next time he's allowed to talk, till kairach, and then go perform them. You'd read the instructions. So, and as part of that, the Rebbe would actually set the table, set the kaira, that was the minute, to set the kaira at the table as part of the Seder. Not to have your kaira set when you come home. So the table is set, yes, but the kaira is not. The kaira is put together at the Seder as part of the Seder.
Kaira?
The kaira means the Seder plate. So stacking the matzahs, putting 6 items down on the Seder plate, setting them up at the Seder while reading instructions as if it's part of the actual Seder. Okay, so having said that, the Sefer Minhagim here on page 38 states that the custom of the Rebbeim, the Chabad Rebbes, would be to begin the Seder immediately after the evening service on the first night of Pesach. On the second night, however, they begin the Seder later at night. They were learning, they were reading. Sorry? A little later. And well, the reason presumably for this is because the first night, where the matzah is biblical, you want to eat it on time, which is before midnight. The second night, which is only because we're out in the exile, we're a little more lenient. And the same thing is true with the reading through the Haggadah. The first night, the Chabad Rebbes would traditionally just read through it without commenting. And the second night, they would comment on the text of the Haggadah. And in this way, sometimes the Seder would go very late. The Rebbe never did that in public. And as I explained the other day, the Rebbe would actually sit at his father-in-law's. The only time the Rebbe was in public at a Seder when he was sitting at his father-in-law's table. Even after his father-in-law passed away, his mother-in-law would still be hosting his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. So he would sit at his father-in-law's table. Of course, he wouldn't say a word because he's in the presence of his father-in-law. And even after his father-in-law passed away, the previous Rebbe, and his mother-in-law would continue to host these Yom Tov meals or the Seder meals. So the Rebbe would sit there, and the previous Rebbe's seat was left empty, but the Rebbe would sit at the table, and there were other guests as well, who would observe the Rebbe conducting the Seder. I think I mentioned this. But even so, the Rebbe still wouldn't speak, just share insights because he's his father-in-law's / mother-in-law's table. So he wouldn't really speak much unless he was asked a question during the meal. He would respond. Otherwise, he wouldn't. However, in the early years of the Rebbe's leadership, after the Seder was over, 2 or 3 in the morning, they would come down to the study hall and hold the farbrengen without drinking, because you cannot drink after the seder. You're not allowed to drink after the not to drink or eat anything after the matzah. So it was a dry farbrengen, but there would sit, and it would be negunim, sometimes even a full Hasidic mimer, and that's when everyone would share insights on the Haggadah after the seder was over. And we have 2 full volumes, at least, of commentary from the Rebbe on the Haggadah, basically every single line. In addition to his own commentary he wrote as an official publication, his commentary to the Haggadah. At any rate, so the first night was more rushed, do the Seder right away, and start right away. The second night was a little bit more lax, start a little later, share some words. Now the footnote continues here. Even on the first night, the Rebbe wouldn't go directly from Ma'ariv to the Seder. The Rebbe would visit the dining halls of the yeshiva, Machan Chana, and other institutions before going to home to hold his own Seder. So the beautiful thing that the Rebbe did as a custom. The Rebbe would visit all the places in Crown Heights that were hosting public Seders. The yeshiva, the seminary, Machan Chana, and when the Iranian Jews came from Iran, when the Shah fell in 79 it was, so Chabad put a lot of effort into helping the migrants settle in, and many of them lived in Crown Heights. Some stayed, but at the time, many of them started out in Crown Heights before they moved to wherever, but many of them actually ended up staying in Crown Heights, just integrating to the Chabad community. By J.J. Hecht, Moshe Hecht's son-in-law's grandfather, by J.J. Hecht, famously, this is one of his big achievements, was to organize money and planes and logistics for these Iranian Jews to come to New York, and everyone to visit their seders also. They were instructed that their seder should follow their custom, and the kitchen should cook rice for them because that's their customs. Even though Chabad, God forbid, we never have rice on Pesach, but they do cook it for them. Likewise, other institutions that would host public seders, they would go visit these seders before he would go conduct his own, and they would actually inspect the kitchen, see how the table was set up, and all the students who was there would stand kind of at attention. And it was a time of like very great endearment. They would come visit some of his local institutions. This is all before the Seder, even on the first night, before he went home to his own Seder with his wife, which I don't know how long it would take. It's just the 2 of them. Can't tell you. But that's a nice kind of thing. And then we actually give a bracha to them too. And he would leave, he would give a special bracha to all of them. And sometimes he would later, or even on the time, tell the managers of the institution, make sure you fix the painting on that wall. I saw the table was broken there, make sure it's fixed. I saw this needs a little cleaning, make sure that's taken care of. And we're like inspecting his institutions at the Seder night. Okay, so it's a beautiful thing. Okay, back to the text of the Shulchan Aruch.
General
Exactly. That was his yearly annual visit to these institutions, any of the institutions in Crown Heights that hosted public seders, the yeshiva, the seminary. The seminary was actually about Balas Tshuva seminary. So the girls who were eating there they were eating there because they didn't necessarily have homes that were making seders, and they were in like a Balas Tshuva seminary in Crown Heights. And this was like, and they would come visit them and give them a special bracha. It was a very beautiful thing. Okay, so actually in the early years, when Rebbe would have the seders upstairs at his mother-in-law's apartment, before his mother-in-law passed away, after the previous Rebbe passed away, while the Rebbe's Rebbe, so Rebbe would go to give the brachas to the yeshivas. Now the seders weren't open to the public, but at the end of the seder, toward like, the end of the seder, everybody was invited, and the door ended up becoming open. People would come in, even if you weren't invited to have a seat. So what happened is the Bachar would wait. They wouldn't start their seder until the Rebbe came to inspect the yeshiva and give the bracha. They're not going to start and then stop in the middle for the Rebbe to come in. They waited for the Rebbe to come in. They would inspect. They would give the bracha. They would go. As soon as they would go, they would do their seders, and they would do so as quickly as possible, so that they can rush and catch as much as they can of the Rebbe's seder in 770.
Oh.
So in between the Rebbe's bracha and them being able to walk into the Rebbe's seder to observe, the Bachar would do their seder, properly, but quickly, so that they can make it to see as much as they can of the Rebbe's seder.
all these images are very special, Rabbi. They're not like side issues, but they are the very essence of it.
Yeah.
It's the gallery of portraits, the album you give us, which is actually a Rembrandt painting.
There are very, very beautiful diaries describing these seders. Once Rebbe's mother-in-law passed away, his wife passed away, very beautiful descriptions. And this is what we would call, like they're saying, the gallery of portraits. It's what we call Godol Shimusha Yosim Lamuda. The Gemara says that it's greater to the servicing. The scholar is greater than the learning from the scholar. The learning from a scholar is somewhat cerebral, but when you're engaged in the observing of the scholar as he behaves, you learn much more. So in many ways, these Bacharim watching the Rebbe's Seder will have learned much more about what a Seder means than from all the writings and teachings that we gave orally. When you see them observe it, and you see the emotion that comes through in his face, it's a very different experience than just reading about it from a text. And this is certainly something that those who are there present try their best to convey to younger generation like myself and us, who we're not merit to be at such beautiful occasions. Sorry, what do you want to say?
This all took place when his mother-in-law was alive, right?
That's right.
When he did his own home.
No, I know one person who attended 2 years. He actually, there's someone I know who attended after his wife passed away in '88, and there was completely alone. Yeah, there was. They would conduct the Seder in his office, and I know someone who was the attendant who would just stand outside and they would open the door, take a bottle of wine, bring a bottle of wine, or something or other. Yeah. Actually, just since we're here, I just insert this. My grandmother, may she live and be well, my mother's mother, Mrs. Tritle, after his wife passed away, she wrote a letter to the Rebbe saying, I'm willing and ready to come to New York to make Pesach for the Rebbe. And whatever customs the Rebbe has, not to worry, I know how to do it and I can handle it, whatever minhagim and stringencies the Rebbe has, I'll make sure to follow it to the T, and it'll be my pleasure and honor to come make Pesach for the Rebbe. And the Rebbe sent her a beautiful response to the effect of Kavanasa Retsuya, which means like your intention is appropriate and good. But please stay home and enjoy Pesach with your family. Yeah. And to someone else who asked the Rebbe to be there or something or other, or I think it was the Luz who mentioned they were like, oh, the Rebbe's going to be alone for the Seder. And the Rebbe said, I'm not alone. I'm with my father-in-law, his Rebbe, who had passed away 40 years before. Obviously, the Rebbe has the ability to sense the spiritual. For him, he's not alone. He's conducting it with his father-in-law. Yeah, so this is the story. So at one of these Seders where the Rebbe was alone, I know someone who was the attendant there. I've heard some interesting things. But otherwise, when the Rebbe was with his wife, I think it was just one or two attendants maybe. So we clear the table, set the table, whatever. At any rate, okay. Worthy tangent. Okay, so let's go back to the text of the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch says, okay, so we learned already in chapter 471 that one should prepare before the Seder by keeping an appetite. 472 begins with saying, okay, make sure your table's set before nightfall, so you can start your Seder right away. Continues the text, La'af with Beis Medrash, even if he's in the study hall. So he's engaged in learning. So ordinarily, learning takes precedent of everything. So finish learning and then go do your next obligation. So finish learning and then go make Kiddush on a regular Shabbos night. But in the Seder, it's not the way it is. As soon as it's nightfall, he's got to get up, leave his study hall, and go to start his Seder. It's a mitzvah to begin the Seder as soon as possible. So the children, they shouldn't fall asleep. Torah says, tell your children the story of the Seder. So part of your obligation is to make sure your children are engaged, and therefore do your best to make sure they're not sleepy and tired. Pro tip, nap your kids before the Seder. Because even if you start right away, it's quite late. Nonetheless, the halacha is start right away. So that way your children can be engaged. Okay, nonetheless, halacha beis, nevertheless. Right? And this part number 2 is not at this point in the action. The big Shulchan Aruch of the Eretz of Cairo. Right? I said that the Eretz of Cairo says, set your table so that set your table before it's nightfall. Make sure you rush home, start right away. And then he says, set your table beautifully and prepare a place for you to lean. And then he gets into the laws of leaning. This next halacha, that even though you're rushing, you shouldn't start too early, is not mentioned in this part of the Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe puts that in here. Okay, this can be explained simply. because the Alter Rebbe is, of course, much more elaborate than the original Shulchan Aruch. So he's including some other things, right? For example, what the Taz adds, the Taz commenting on the Shulchan Aruch says that even though you're rushing to start right away, don't start too early, because you're not allowed to start too early. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe puts that in. That's already explained. We'll see the what follows is going to be a little less understood why the Alter Rebbe structures it that way, which we'll get to tomorrow, I guess. Okay, we'll look at this in more detail tomorrow. It's running late, but at any rate, what he begins to say here is we'll see is something we know already, that you have to start. You can start the Seder right away, but you can't bring Yom Tov in early, because the 4 cups of wine. The first is Kiddush, and the 4 cups of wine must be done at nightfall when you're actually obligated, not early. Ordinarily, you could bring Shabbos in early by making Kiddush early and bringing Shabbos in early, no problem. But on the Seder night, the Kiddush is part of the 4 cups of wine, and the 4 cups of wine must be done only at nightfall. And therefore, you could not start your Seder early. So even though I just finished telling you that you have to rush to do your Seder as soon as possible, so your kids don't fall asleep, but nonetheless, you can't do it too early. You have to do it after full nightfall. That's what he's going to say here. And then we'll see how the Alter Rebbe switches from the original Shulchan Aruch, and I hope between today and tomorrow, some insight will fall onto me as to why they change in order. Okay, have a wonderful day, Yidden.
Thank you very much for that beautiful talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
We are, God willing, good news from everyone, and the schus and the merit of our Torah should bring protection and peace and safety
Amen.
and end to all this trauma.
Rabbi, really dedicate this class also in the memory of Shmuel ben Yehuda Leib,
Shmuel ben Yehuda Leib.
passed away last week afterwards.
Shmuel ben Yehuda Leib. Sam Gertz passed away, I'm sure. We'll dedicate his memory. As a philanthropist and a community activist here in Montreal, certainly was worthy of us dedicating a class to him. Okay, have a wonderful day, Yidden.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.